I knew something was off the moment Kyle stood over my desk with that smug grin like he'd just discovered fire. He leaned in too close, reeking of cologne and startup failure, and said, "You still use manual cron verification loops? Damn, that's cute." I didn't flinch, just kept typing. He chuckled like a frat boy who thought he understood systems because he once configured a Docker container. "You know," he added, patting my desk like I was a houseplant, "modern infrastructure runs itself." I'd been holding this place together with quiet precision for over 11 years. My name's Leah, and I'm the reason this company never once missed a license renewal window or failed an audit. Not that anyone ever said it aloud. I built the bones of the platform, the daemons, the automated license checks, the authentication tunnels that kept our uptime guarantees spotless. No one really asked how it all stayed online. They just assumed it did, like electricity or gravity. That was fine by me. I never needed applause, just silence and a machine that obeyed. But silence doesn't impress men like Kyle Withers. He was brought in to restructure IT, which apparently meant firing anyone over 35 who didn't call themselves a DevOps evangelist. I didn't drink during the all-hands meet and greets. I didn't post dog memes in Slack. And I sure as hell didn't pretend Kubernetes was a personality. If you're enjoying this story so far, take a second to like the video and hit that subscribe button. 97% of listeners forget to do it, but it helps more than you know and keeps these stories coming. Anyway, back to Kyle. He started doing walkthroughs like a landlord. I caught him once flipping through my cabinet, muttering about dead weight. The guy had been here all of 6 weeks and was already using phrases like cloud native refresh cycle and cost to output headcount ratio, like they were magic spells. He saw back-end infrastructure as a replaceable commodity, a swap in, swap out affair, like Lego. So when he called me non-essential legacy clutter during the Thursday metrics review, I didn't even blink. That morning, he'd CC'd HR on a calendar invite titled Infra Review, Danner Offboarding Consideration. I wasn't surprised. He didn't look me in the eye as I walked into that glass box conference room. He just tapped his iPad and said, "You've had a great run, Leah, but we need a more modern mindset. You're just back-end support. The system will run without you." That's when I realized something no one in the room did yet. They hadn't read the deployment logs. They didn't know that over a dozen of our enterprise clients required biometric validated license renewals, systems I'd built from scratch, documented religiously, and tucked behind my own fingerprint checksum per federal compliance contracts. Not because I was paranoid, because the law required it. Because when you build authentication systems for freight logistics software used by the government, you don't rely on passwords. You use identity-bound authorization. I'd warned them once, quietly, in a Slack message buried under Kyle's stream of celebratory gifs. He'd replied, "We'll patch around it," then muted the thread. When I walked out that door, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't fight. I didn't explain. I just left one note in my final commit logs, buried but visible, if anyone cared to look. Core validator requires authID faxidldanner.biochecksum, non-substitutable per contract. And then I handed in my badge. It took them 36 hours to realize what I'd really taken with me. The email subject line was classic, Kyle. Systems Modernization Initiative, Phase 1, Redundancy Reassignment. Translation: fire the people who actually understood the system and replace them with some budget contractor across 5 time zones and 0 context. It came through just before lunch on a Tuesday. No salutation, no names, just a bulleted list of legacy roles under review. And mine was highlighted in bold like a scarlet letter. The kicker? They didn't even send it from our internal HR platform. It was a Google Doc, shared, editable. Kyle had scribbled possibly non-essential consult audit team next to my name. 2 question marks, like I was a line item, a maybe. I should have walked then, but I didn't. I cared too much about the code, about what would happen if someone came in swinging a machete through my work without reading the damn labels. So I asked for a meeting, not to beg, to warn. We sat in a glass conference room that still smelled like dry erase markers and new carpet glue. Kyle sat across from me like a king holding court, flanked by 2 junior project managers he'd poached from his failed startup. One of them was wearing a hoodie that said, "Ship fast, fail faster." Real comforting. I laid it out. The core back-end systems, especially licensing and compliance, use biometric-based verification. It's required for at least 5 of our federal contracts. Heartbeats won't renew without identity confirmation, and that identity is currently bound to my checksum. There's a 72-hour expiration window. If the licenses lapse, the clients go dark. Full stop. Kyle blinked twice, like I'd just spoken Aramaic. Then he turned to the junior with the hoodie. Can we patch around it? I almost laughed. Patch around biometric-bound contracts, like duct taping a cracked spine. No, I said calmly. That would void every SLA you've signed in the last 3 years. It's not about code. It's about audit chains and legal continuity. They're tied to me, or someone with clearance. He smirked. Sounds like an ego problem, not a system one. Then he CC'd HR. It didn't matter that the entire system had been architected with open documentation, proper logging, and off-site backups. It didn't matter that I'd future-proofed it with modular pathways and zero-trust logic layers. None of it mattered. Because in Kyle's world, anything that didn't have a dashboard or produce a KPI was invisible, and invisible things were dispensable. They scheduled the meeting for Friday. Just me, Kyle, and an HR rep named Colleen who always blinked too fast and avoided eye contact when delivering bad news. Colleen had once told me she admired how I just did the work. Now she was prepping the paperwork to erase me from it. The thing is, I knew I wasn't irreplaceable. But the system? That was a different story. They thought legacy meant outdated. I knew it meant permanent, written in the bones of everything they depended on. Still, I gave them one last chance. I added a line to the change management log the night before the meeting. Reminder, biometric fallback still not transitioned. Recommend resolution prior to access revocation. That was me being generous. That was me trying to save them from themselves. But Kyle? Kyle never read logs. He read headlines, TED Talks, agile blogs written by 24-year-olds who'd never seen a prod environment. He didn't want systems. He wanted shortcuts. The conference room they led me to wasn't even the usual HR space. This one had no windows, just a bare table, 2 chairs, and one of those mounted speakers in the ceiling that hums like it's listening. Kyle was already inside, arms crossed like a bouncer at a club no one wanted to get into. Colleen from HR sat beside him, posture stiff, her fingers laced like she was praying for the floor to swallow her whole. Kyle didn't offer a greeting, didn't offer a seat. He just launched in with, "Leah, thanks for coming in. This won't take long." It was the smug kind of sentence people rehearse in the mirror, the kind that makes them feel powerful because they know you're about to lose something they think defines you. "I've spoken with leadership," he continued, flipping through a manila folder like he was auditioning for a courtroom drama. "And we've determined your role is no longer aligned with our forward-facing infrastructure goals. You've been with the company a long time, and we appreciate your service, but..." That's where he paused, just long enough to let the HR rep slide a piece of paper across the table. Severance package, standard. Then came the line, "You're just back-end support. The system will run without you." Like I'd been holding up a lemonade stand, not the backbone of their entire compliance architecture. I looked at him, really looked, and I saw it. That flicker behind the eyes of a man who'd already updated his LinkedIn with successful staff optimization before the meeting even started. He thought I'd cry, or argue, or maybe beg. Instead, I stood, quietly, deliberately, pulled my ID badge from the lanyard and placed it on the table without a sound. Then I looked him dead in the eyes and said, "Read the deployment logs before Monday." He blinked, then smirked. Security entered the room like it was a play. 2 guys with radios and bored expressions. One of them was chewing gum. Colleen shifted uncomfortably, probably realizing she'd seen my name listed as system architect on a dozen documents, but never asked what that meant. I didn't look back as they walked me out. I didn't need to. I knew what was coming. The thing about infrastructure is this. If it's built right, no one notices it until it breaks. And when it breaks, you realize who understood it and who never bothered to learn. They thought it was personal. They thought they were cutting off a limb they didn't need anymore. But what they'd really done was sever the heartbeat. Outside, the air was sharp with October cold. I zipped my jacket, walked past the smokers on the loading dock, and didn't say a word. No drama, no final speech. Just one thought in my head over and over as I walked to my car. 72 hours. That's how long they had. And the countdown had already started. The first cracks didn't show up until midday Saturday, 36 hours after I was walked out like a temp who forgot her lunch in the fridge. It started small, as these things always do. A low priority ticket from one of our mid-tier clients flagged a license renewal delay. Something about a heartbeat sync timing out during its usual cycle. The auto reply kicked in, and no one noticed. But then the dashboards began to light up like a Christmas tree with a death wish. 3 top-tier enterprise clients, all with federal oversight, all with strict 72-hour license validation windows. Each reported cascading compliance token expirations. Internal dashboards started flashing red. Back-end logs read like a slow-motion car crash. Heartbeat failure, validation error, token mismatch, license invalid. Kyle was at brunch. He didn't even see the Slack thread until nearly 2 hours into the incident, when one of the junior engineers tagged him 6 times in all caps. His reply? Try resetting the license service manually. Bounce the containers. I'd have paid real money to watch the look on his face when the team reported back. They couldn't. Because the scripts he told them to run, those reset hooks, those heartbeat reinstatement tools, were all locked behind one thing: my biometric hash. Not a password, not a token, not a credential they could just email or reset. A hard-coded, audit-compliant biometric checksum tied to my employee profile and bound by contract to the core validator system. The same system he'd assured everyone would run without me. And it wasn't hidden either. Hell, it was in the root directory, one clean line documented in plain language for anyone with eyes. Core validator requires authid mar ldanner.bio checksum, non-substitutable per license contract. There it was. Sitting like a quiet landmine in the middle of a field no one bothered to map. The engineers panicked. A few more senior folks tried to write an override script, but it was useless. The system didn't just call the validator once. It was looped through every uptime gateway and mirrored across all regional license daemons. Any tampering triggered an instant lockout protocol and generated a compliance breach report to legal and audit. All by design, all perfectly documented. Just unread. Because no one reads documentation anymore, especially not Kyle. By the time he got on the emergency bridge call, his voice was thin and reedy. Gone was the swagger. Gone was the guy who thought cron jobs were jokes and containers meant job security. He asked the team, "Who else can authorize these resets?" Dead silence. Then someone, a contractor from the offshore team, voice trembling, said, "Leah was the only bound credential." Kyle barked something about system over-engineering, but it fell flat. The damage was done. Because what no one told him, and what he never thought to ask, was that federal compliance for 3 of our largest clients required license heartbeat validation from a biometric identity listed in the contract itself. And the contract? Named me, specifically. It didn't allow substitutions, it didn't allow workarounds, it didn't even allow for delay. Just one window, every 72 hours. Validate or deactivate. And now, we were at hour 38 and counting. By Sunday morning, the walls were starting to sweat. Legal had called for an emergency meeting, 8 a.m. sharp, cameras on, no excuses. The invite subject line was one word: urgent. Not urgent, like missing donuts in the break room. Capital U urgent, like we might be in breach of federal contract and facing a class action lawsuit urgent. I wasn't there, obviously. I was on a plane by then, somewhere between Denver and San Francisco, sipping ginger ale and reviewing onboarding paperwork from Xenix Corp. But I knew exactly how that meeting was going. Kyle showed up 5 minutes late and tried to assert dominance by launching into a speech about legacy complexity and modernizing systems architecture. He painted me as some rogue sysadmin who'd tangled the code like Christmas lights around her own ego, said the biometric locks were an outdated practice and that our newer clients weren't even using that stuff. He even dropped a line, "God help me," about just rebooting the stack from the cloud side. And then compliance legal hit share screen. There it was, plain as daylight. Black text on white, client contract, FedLog ISIS section. 12.1.b, license renewal must be validated via biometric key of named personnel, L. Danner, every 72 hours. Substitution requires 90-day notice and client pre-approval. Same clause repeated for 2 other enterprise accounts, each signed with the words binding compliance window. 3 out of our top 10 clients, 41% of our total annual revenue. Legal paused. Let it sink in. Then someone, probably Jeff from Contracts, who always had the energy of a drowned possum, asked the only question that mattered. Did anyone transition her biometric credential before she was removed? No one spoke. Because they didn't. Because Kyle hadn't thought it was important. Because back-end support was just a line item in his budget spreadsheet, and he was too busy tweeting about AI-enriched pipeline acceleration to open the damn logs. The head of legal exhaled audibly, then clicked to the next slide, an automated audit trail from our own systems. Timestamp. Friday, 7:31 p.m. System. Status, awaiting biometric heartbeat signature. Next renewal window, Monday, 4 hours a.m. Current time, hour 49, alert level. Critical, pending deactivation. The silence in that call could have drowned a city. Then the GC leaned forward, voice cold, calm, and furious. You're telling me we fired the only credentialed individual authorized to validate uptime on our largest compliance-bound systems without transfer or override, 49 hours before the licenses expire? Kyle stammered. Something about offboarding and transitioning roles, but the logs didn't care. The logs didn't bluff. They didn't sweat or spin or deflect. They just told the truth, merciless and time-stamped. And now leadership understood what I'd tried to explain 2 weeks ago. This wasn't a system crash. This was a legal detonation, and the timer was still ticking. By hour 55, panic was no longer a whisper. It was policy. The company had entered what one of the engineers later described as code red, but without the caffeine. Kyle stopped showing up to meetings with hair product. His voice, once a smug baritone, now cracked around the edges like a radio station losing signal. That morning, he tried to stage a fix, not a thoughtful repair, a blunt force bypass. He called in the lead infrastructure team, what was left of it after his streamlining. 3 devs, 2 contractors, and a sleep-deprived sysadmin named Marvin, who looked like he hadn't seen sunlight since Reagan. The plan was simple. Rewrite the validator function, strip out the biometric key, and reroute the license renewal through a generic elevated credential they'd cooked up on the fly. They called it failover authorization. Cute name for a death wish. But as soon as they hit the outer logic layers, they tripped the warning I'd written in bold, clean, well-documented code. Warning. Core validator is SLA bound. Manual override will trigger license nullification. Notify legal counsel before proceeding. Somebody, probably Marvin, had the good sense to pause. He took a screenshot and sent it to legal. Within 5 minutes, the general counsel herself was on the engineering floor. She wasn't wearing shoes. They say she looked at the message, went dead quiet, then asked the question that iced the room. Is this the original clause? One of the engineers, hands shaking, nodded. She asked again, who signed off on this architecture? No one answered. They didn't have to. The signature was embedded in the policy file, dated, verified, 4 years ago, initialed by the CEO himself. See, back then, after we nearly lost our DHS contract due to a third-party override, I was asked to build a new validation logic, one that couldn't be tampered with. Ever. I did exactly that. And I made sure leadership signed off on every line of risk language, including this one. Override attempts on core validator invalidate all SLAs tied to biometric continuity. Legal assumes full breach liability. Legal nearly screamed. She called Kyle into a side room. No cameras, no recording, and people swear you could hear her through the drywall. 10 minutes later, she stormed out. Kyle didn't. But the engineers, they sat frozen, like war medics in a field hospital waiting for the bombs to stop falling. Because now, the path forward was clear. No override, no patch, no fallback credential, only biometric return. And I was 312 miles away, watching a sunset on a rooftop in Mountain View with a cold bottle of beer and no intention of answering my phone. The system had been built to comply with everything they asked for. And now it was doing exactly what it was supposed to, which meant they were 17 hours from total shutdown and completely out of moves. The CEO didn't bother with a call. He showed up in person, stormed into the office in jeans and a half-zip jacket like he'd sprinted from his Tesla without finishing the Spotify ad. No assistant, no entourage, just raw, furious disbelief leaking out of every syllable. He walked straight into the crisis room, conference table covered in laptops, coffee-stained printouts, and at least one empty bottle of Tums. Kyle stood when he entered. Bad move. "Sit down," the CEO snapped. "Start talking." Kyle tried to open with strategy. Something about unexpected biometric dependencies, inheritance issues, and proactive mitigation efforts. Legal interrupted before he could finish that sentence. "No," she said, voice flat. He fired the only credentialed operator tied to the compliance-bound validator, without transfer, without legal review, without notifying our clients, and without reading the SLA clause he signed himself 4 years ago. The CEO's jaw locked up so tight people swore you could hear his teeth grind. Then he turned to Kyle. "Did you read the documentation?" Silence. He repeated it, slower, colder. "Did you read the fuck-saying documentation?" Kyle mumbled something. People in the room couldn't tell if it was sort of or parts of it. Either way, it didn't matter, because someone else was already dialing my number, then another, and another. The first call rang once and went straight to voicemail. The second hit the same wall. The third? Blocked. Flat out rejected. And then came the final blow. One of the contractors gasped. Actually gasped, loud enough for the room to turn. He pointed at the massive monitor on the east wall, usually reserved for uptime graphs and server maps. But someone had opened a browser tab. And there it was. XenixCorp.com, right on the front page. Bright banner. High-resolution graphics. Introducing Danner Stack, TM, compliant, always-on license architecture for secure infrastructure, built to exceed federal continuity standards. Available now. There was even a press quote from Xenix's CTO, something about strategic innovation hardened by experience. And underneath it, my name. Leah Danner, Chief Systems Strategist. The CEO didn't move, didn't blink. Someone whispered, "She's at Xenix." And that's when it clicked. This wasn't just a screw-up. This was a defection. This was the person they kicked to the curb without a second thought, now powering their biggest competitor. One who'd already started calling our clients the moment the heartbeat alerts went out. The room fell apart in slow motion. Project managers argued over response language. Engineers debated if anything could still be salvaged. One guy opened his laptop, took one look at the dashboard, and quietly closed it again like he was saying goodbye. Kyle slumped in his chair, staring at the Xenix banner like it had betrayed him personally, like he couldn't comprehend how a quiet back-end ghost like me had walked out of his mess and into their market. He thought firing me was a cost-saving measure. Turns out, it was the most expensive mistake of his life. And the clock kept ticking. Hour 59. By the time they found the clause, the office had gone quiet in that special kind of way, like right before a tornado touches down, when even the lights seemed to hold their breath. Legal had been combing through old system documentation like it was a crime scene, trying to answer the only question that mattered now. Is there any way to stop what's coming? The answer was buried deep. Not in the active logs, not in the production code base. They'd already panicked through those. It was in a read-only archive folder marked Core Contracts, Legacy L. Danner SLA Addenda.pdf, page 14, section 9.6. I wrote it 5 years ago after we nearly lost a defense client due to an unauthorized override attempt by a junior hire who didn't understand compliance windows. I got the CEO to sign off on it after a long meeting where I explained, slowly, that automation without human gatekeeping was like building a missile system with no launch codes. The clause was only 2 sentences long. In the event of offboarding, termination, or removal of the bound system architect without transition protocol or override credential transfer, the license validator will enter dormant mode at hour 72 post last auth. No exceptions unless reauthorized by the architect of record. That architect? Me. And the system? We were on hour 70. 70. Damn. Hours, 2 more, and every compliance-bound system across 3 continents would stop talking to its heartbeat demon. License renewals would flatline, data syncs would stall, and worst of all, clients would be legally required to cease operations due to SLA breach. They'd already started to feel it. Angry emails were pouring in from FedLoggySys, Norcom, Trident Chain, all screaming about token failures, about non-compliance exposure, about damages. One client simply wrote, "You had one job." Meanwhile, Xenix Corp had rolled out a welcome mat so bright it might as well have been a lighthouse. They were already hosting webinars. Their landing page had a new banner. From chaos to compliance, DannerStack migrations now available. I knew because someone had screen shared it during the meeting, and no one could look away. The CEO, red-faced and silent, pointed at the clause and said only one thing. "Who missed this?" And everyone looked at Kyle. He didn't move, didn't argue, just stared at the table like maybe if he stared long enough, it would swallow him whole. The CEO leaned in, not shouting, not whispering, just a voice that had hit its final octave of disappointment. "Did you read the docs?" Kyle opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Not a sound, not a syllable. And that was when the last illusion fell away. That anyone still believed this was a glitch or bad luck or a rogue coder's revenge. This was policy, signed, audited, time-bombed, and unstoppable. Because no one, not Kyle, not Colleen from HR, not the sleep-deprived engineers who tried their best, had bothered to do the one thing I asked before I left: read the deployment logs. Now they were 2 hours away from total blackout, and I was the only person who could stop it. Spoiler alert, I didn't. Monday morning hit like a funeral bell. The heartbeat monitor, what little of it was still operational, logged its final timeout at 4:03 a.m. EST, and with that, the system did exactly what it was built to do in the absence of validation. It went to sleep. Not crashed. Not broken. Just still, like a sentinel with no command. 3 clients terminated contracts by breakfast. By noon, 11 more had sent formal letters of intent to exit, and by 3:30 p.m., Xenix Corp had done what no one thought possible. They absorbed 91 enterprise clients in under 24 hours. It was precise. Surgical. I'd been planning it with them for weeks. I didn't answer the phone that day. Didn't need to, because everything that mattered was already public. Xenix issued a press release at 4:30 p.m., Pacific, bland, and professional. Xenix Corp is proud to welcome a historic wave of platform migration clients seeking uptime assurance, audit continuity, and hardened compliance logic. My name was buried in paragraph 5. Leah Danner, recently appointed Chief Systems Strategist, will lead core integrations. That was it. No gloating, no quotes, no victory lap, just a quiet fact. Meanwhile, back at my old company, things weren't so calm. Someone posted a blurry photo in the old dev Slack, now mostly abandoned, of Kyle being walked out by the same 2 guards who'd escorted me. One of them, ironically, was holding a box with a mug inside that read, "Disrupt or Die." It didn't take long after that. The CEO went silent for 3 days, then re-emerged with a carefully worded company-wide email titled Leadership Update and Commitment to Documentation Excellence. It included this line: "Going forward, all core infrastructure changes and offboarding decisions will require executive-level documentation review, including all attached system clauses, SLAs, and metadata." Translation: he now reads the code comments himself. Funny how quickly things change when a $9.3 million revenue hole appears overnight. As for me, I don't hate them. Not even Kyle, because I didn't sabotage anything. I didn't alter a line of code, delete a file, or revoke a key. I just walked away and let the system do what it was always meant to do: tell the truth, out loud, when no one else would.